Hello there, welcome back. As we're going towards the massive release of Top Gun Maverick, I thought I'd watch the original Top Gun, and then I'd also watch Days of Thunder, because why not? The two Tony Scott, Tom Cruise, Bruckheimer, Don Simpson produced catastrophes of cinema. That aren't as bad as they seemed at the time. Mainly because you're used to Tony Scott's style in it. He managed to move over a lot of the cracks that were in those early films, because there was lots of dodgy stuff in those films. Yeah, these are weird films, because they're both films that seem like three films in one, fitting each other, and if you look at Tony Scott's other films, they're not actually that typical of what he does. They seem like he's in these films, and there's bits he's interested in and bits he's not interested in. So he only feels half there. When you look at some of The Last Boy Scout or True Romance, or even some of his later films like Unstoppable, they feel much more coherently someone's film, even though they were written by other people and things. They do feel like they do cohere into something that makes sense. And these two, sometimes he's there and sometimes you can tell he's just trying to shoot it prettily because it doesn't make sense. It's that kind of thing. And I like Tony Scott, but these two films are probably the ones I'd watch least of any of his films. They're just, I'd actually watch Days of Thunder more, because I like car racing, and planes don't do much for me. But I am watching the new Top Gun. So, Top Gun. What do you say about Top Gun? The most homoerotic film of all time. Unless you count Gladiator movies. It's a strange film. I mean, the big thing about these two films, straight away, is they're absolutely awful for dealing with women. They don't understand women at all. Like, at all. The women characters are all cliches. There's nothing for actresses. And in both films, they have good actresses try to deliver performances where there's just nothing there for them. So this one is Kelly McGillis, who'd just done Witness, which had really helped her a lot. And now she had to suddenly play this character made no sense. She's meant to be a professional, but she's tarted up to look like a model throughout the film, even when she's maybe dressed down, she looks like a model. And she is sleeping with one of her students, which would be a big no-no nowadays. But a big no-no even then. And it's like, well, if she's one of the people overseeing him, that's conflict of interest straight away. This film just ignores. It's just like, yeah, they're seeing each other in love. Love conquers all, or something. It's terrible. It makes her character look so stupid and so corrupt, and it makes his character look like a total dick, which is quite easy because the character looks like a total dick throughout the whole film. He's this arrogant guy whose insecurity caused his father died in mysterious circumstances, and he always pushes too much. His call sign's a Maverick because, who needs writing when you've got a call sign to tell you what the subtext is? I mean, the whole film is just stupid. I mean, I'm sure there's a good film to be made about Top Gun and that academy and all the training goes on, but this is not it. And you've got a lot of good actors and supporting parts like Tom Skerritt and Michael Ironside doing their best to try and make it look interesting. You have like a Val Kilmer as Iceman, who's his rival, who actually makes total sense throughout the film. Everything he says in the film actually makes sense if you're not a Tom Cruise fanboy of a character or a fanboy of his character. Like, logically, every time that Val Kilmer speaks, he makes sense. what he's saying does make sense. It's like, what the hell are you doing? So I liked him more than the lead character. And Kilmer's doing almost nothing in this film. He knows he just can get by with attitude. That's all he needs to do. He's just floating through this film saying, okay, I can steal this film with doing as little as possible. You know. Which he does. So, I mean, kudos for him, you know, where he was in. What film he was in. It's funny because Tony Scott used him much later as the kind of Elvis, Dream Elvis character in True Romance. We actually got stuff to do. So you've also got Anthony Edwards as Tom Cruise's pal, Goose. And the chemistry in those two are a lot of fun. I mean, that's the thing is, the Maverick character looks human when he's dealing with his pal, because suddenly it's just two actors playing off each other and haven't been silly, and it's like, it works because it's just two actors who are drilled together. That's it. And whenever you've got a scene with those two in it, it tends to work. Even if the writing's not that good, they tend to make it work. Even the crassest, stupid stuff, they make it work. Even when they're pretty much, the dialogue is pretty much speaking the subtext, they still make it work. And Tony Scott's doing his damnedest to shoot this stuff to look as gorgeous as possible to try and take your eye away from the plot. And whenever time the film is in the air, even though the film isn't shot for, like, back and forth, for, like, this plane's going this way, this plane's going this way, let's see how they interact with each other to try and get a sense of direction. It's fast cutting all the time. But Scott knows what he's doing, so you get an idea of what's going on anyway. I mean, it's a big thing if you've seen a projector compared to seeing it in a TV screen. You get more of a sense of the planes and how it's shot. It's very skillful. It's not the way I would prefer to see it, but it's skillfully done. You have to admit it's skillfully done. But it's a director who's like, okay, as soon as I've got planes, I'll deal with the planes. Anything but the actors. You know. Because when you get to the acting scenes, he's shooting it, but you don't ever get the feeling he's that interested. He's just not. And he shoots everyone like it's like they're a model, which is why all the scenes with the boys as they're competing is essentially, it looks like Homer Rogerson 101, because he's shooting them like models. So anything any undertone is just suddenly obvious, except for certain repressed people who can't see it. But, and you know, and when Tony Scott was asked about it later on, he did have a sense of humour about it. He's like, yeah, you can look kind of that way. So I mean, it's one of those things like, he is aware of what's going on. He understands it. You know, but again, it's one of those things. He didn't even want to do the film because his last film, The Hunger, which is a much better film than Top Gun, had bombed. He needed a job, and he was working commercials, and it was like, well, they're offering it to me, I'll just do it. But you don't get the feel in this film that he's really that interested in this subject matter. It's that he likes certain things that he really wants to get right, but you don't get the feeling of a passion for this project. I mean, the passion of the project is from the producers who want this film to look a certain way. You have all these demographics, like you have a love story. No matter how stupid it is, you have a character dynamic of a character trying to get over trauma and prove himself to the world, which is the most basic idea of ever in a drama. This is done in the most basic way possible. You have some fight scenes at the end to show he's a hero. This is drama 101 constantly. And the reason why it works for an audience is the fact it is drama 101 is they're following every convention. They're doing everything that they should be doing. They're doing it badly, but it's shot a certain way. They've got actors who are game to try and make it work. Cruise was pretty young and he still looked very baby-faced and had a lot of energy, which helped the character a lot. You know, it really helped the character because it's like, there was a character, he just managed to, it was kind of old school movie star performance of, there's not much here, I'm going to have to try and make it work for what's there. And that worked in this film. That's made a star, because he was preparing this film even when it was getting really stupid. But it is a bad film. But it's a film that I understand why people enjoy. It's just that I think it's half the film you wait fast forward through. It's not my kind of film. I like the Tony Scott elements, but I think it's a terribly put together film. And it's just so terrible with women characters. It's just so terrible with them. So we're curious to see how they do the second one, if they manage to adjust it into 30 years later and actually make it watchable. I've heard good things about it, so hopefully it'll work well. I like the director's done some films I like, so I'm hoping it's. And then Christopher McQuarrie's writing it, and he's a very talented guy, so hopefully it'll come together. Okay, the Days of Thunder was the bastard shell of Top Gun. It was a film they made like I think it was 5 years later. I think it was. I'm not sure when Top Gun was 85 or 86. Then this was 1990. And it was promoted as the new Top Gun. It was going to be the next big hit. It was going to be massive. They were shooting they were shooting all over the place for this film. It was following the Top Gun formula. Robert Towne was writing it. Tony Scott was directing it. The Bruckheimer Simpson machine was back on. It was going to take over the world. It was going to do this. It was going to do that, and it came out and underperformed. Hilariously so, and then basically after that, because they'd spent so much money on it, much more than they should have, they lost their deal apparently. From what I've heard, they lost their deal with Paramount, or they moved on, or something went wrong and they weren't no longer in that space. Even though they'd done Top Gun, they'd done Beverly Hills Cop films, done Flashdance, it was like, nope. So this film must have been a nightmare for everybody. And it was telling it was the last film Cruise did with Simpson Bruckheimer for a very long time. Until this new Top Gun, I think. And Tony Scott got a break from him as well. And actually it was a good break for him because he went out and did Last Boy Scout. He did True Romance. And those were films that kind of gave him some critical cachet. And then when he went back with them, he did Crimson Tide, which is one of the best films they ever did as producers, because it avoided all the bullshit from the other films. But this was a film that everything went wrong. Robert Towne was meant to had been writing Two Jakes. He'd walked off that. I've done a video on that a few weeks ago, which can cover the whole thing. So he went on to this one. It was a paying gig basically. Robert Duvall was meant to do Godfather 3. They wouldn't pay him the money, so he left and did this thing to get paid. It was a pattern. Tom Cruise has come off a lot of big films like Rain Man, Colour of Money, Born 4th of July. He was as hot as you could possibly be at that point. He was really racking up the hits. He'd done an odd film like Cocktail that was a Top Gun formula, but he'd done a lot of stuff in between. He was trying different things. So he'd got probably a good rep since Top Gun as well. And this was just basically, to everybody, it's a paycheck movie for him, basically. It's a star vehicle. Even though he'd written the story and he wanted to do a car racing thing because he was a car racing nut. So it was a package, and it was like everyone thought, well, everyone know, we're a lot of professionals here, they're all going to come together and they're all going to make a great film. And then the film started to come together and not the way people expected. And the interesting thing is this, I do like this one a lot more than Top Gun because you get feeling that they were into something that they really liked, which was the idea of the mentality of these race car drivers. Like how messed up they were and how weird they were. So Towne wrote these characters like Robert Duvall character is the old guy who's the mechanic teaching Cruise's character how to drive these cars and how to be a winner. Cruise was dealing with Michael Rooker, who was a rival driver. But the mentality of these characters, even though they've been behaving arrogantly, was a lot more interesting, a lot less, cliched than Top Gun. but it wasn't a blockbuster story. So you were getting these kind of quiet scenes, and then you were getting these big car race scenes as well as you see them in the circuit, and it was very much kind of like Le Mans and Grand Prix in the sense that there's a lot of interesting stuff here, but it wasn't quite working entirely because the demands of the story and demands of the background were different. But there was a lot of really enjoyable things here. I mean, there was some nice scenes. There was a sense that it was a much more grounded kind of character for Cruise. He wasn't playing him as arrogant as the other character, as the other part. Even with a ridiculous name called Cole Travis or something like that. It was a ridiculous sounding name. And then threw in the love interest played by Nicole Kidman, who again, like Kelly McGillis, had come off some good stuff and was given a ridiculous character, and she did the best she could with what was there. You know, she was doing her best for ridiculous dialogue scenes. It was almost like Town was fascinated by the Duval Cruise characters, and he had to do this as a commission. I'll write something. Who cares? And so she just became a character who called them out in a bullshit every so often. You know. And it was like, so the film became this weird thing where it's the first 40 minutes is basically Cruise and Duval, then Kidman comes into it, then she kind of takes over for a little while. But at the end of the film, it's still Cruise and Duval having to come together and win the race. And the finale is between those two. So this character who has lots of dialogue that would have been much better in the mouth of Robert Duvall, because it would have been an established character, an established thing that he could have done some more with. Instead, he's telling, oh, you can't see these things because race drivers are superstitious a lot and stuff like that. And it was like, well, you've basically started a whole drama and then just thrown it away for a while, then bring it back and throw it away. And it's like, it's kind of very schizo because they need this romance in here, but they don't actually need the romance. The romance is it's a father-son relationship story. And throwing a romance into it when it's not needed doesn't really work. And also the relationship between Rooker and Cruise is more interesting than the relationship between Cruise and Kidman, because it's basically Cruise seeing a guy who's like him 10 years time, who's all this same, he's basically a great driver who has all the same stubbornness, has all the same superstitions. And it's basically a decent guy, but he's a rough spots to him. And because Michael Rooker's played him, you know, it's going to be some really good acting. So, you've got a lot of good actors in this film, and some have been serviced by the script and some aren't. But the film just cannot stop throwing this romance at you, which does not work. And it just kills the pace. And then you've got Cruise's loss of confidence because he was in a car crash and he's finding it hard to get back in the cars. It takes him a while to actually get over that. And then eventually he gets over it and he's back. Which is cliched, but it works well enough because the drivers are portraying, you can see them being that superstitious and that messed up. And the idea of being around a track so fast, you would pick up weird stuff anyway, so it's not... It's all interesting stuff that is much more working class and much more 70s style than the other half of the movie. So you've got a movie where you're feeling that Town and Tony Scott wanted to make, which is about this father-son thing. You've got this massive car romance thing that you feel Simpson Brooklyn wanted to make. And they're fighting each other the whole way through the film, and neither side's getting in anywhere. Apparently, like Scott and the producers were fighting each other about how to set up stuff throughout the film as well. And it was like, obviously, you had two different films going on here, and both of them were getting filmed, and they figured it out. And they had to edit the film in like 7 weeks or something. So apparently, there was lots of really good stuff on the cutting room floor. It was like, this should have been released like months later to give the director a chance to finish it. Because there's this whole thing that's just weirdly paced in the second half. The first half's decently paced, but the second half jumps around a lot. And you've got stuff that seems to be forgotten and dropped for 20 minutes. It's like, that's not really well done. You need to do that better. You've experienced actors doing it. It's just like you said, they ran out of time. So it's a more failed film, but it's a more interesting film. but they're still too what the hell is this film, because they are so suffused with this weird, pompous, producing, influenced arrogance. You know, where all the women tend to look like prostitutes, all the men seem repressed and weird. You know, the visuals look great, but it's a weird, beautiful neuroticism to it. It's like this sense of it. Everything looks beautiful, but it's very neurotic. Like, you know, like a 50s thing, like a 50s kind of ideal world, but everything's sick underneath. That's what these films have under in the tone of them. That's really interesting and weird, even though they fail completely dramatically. So they're interesting failure. They are weird. They're very odd films, but they are kind of interesting why they're odd. So they're recommending a sense of just how weird the 80s were, especially the Bruckheimer and Simpson films. But also, there's a lot of oddness to them that's kind of interesting. But especially Days of Thunder. Days of Thunder's got some very odd elements to it that do not work together, but are really interesting. I mean, Top Gun is just strange. It's an odd film. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back soon for another one, but that's me for now. Right, bye.